After understanding the concept of components and how to split the components and what is a parent component and what is a child component and what is the hierarchy of components, it is now time to understand one of the important and core concepts of ReactJS, that are props and state. It is not only important to understand what are these independently, but what is the difference between these two. So ultimately, props or state represent some kind of data. Okay, so both props and state are the data, but what actually differentiates them is a very key point. Okay, so props, so basically you communicate a lot, right? Like in real world or any place, so normally using network. So how components interact or communicate between themselves. So parent component can interact with child component using props. So it means props are the data passed from my parent component to the child. Okay, so props are the data passed by someone else to me. It's like your surname, your first name, right? So that data doesn't actually belong to you. It comes from your parent, and maybe your parent comes from your grandparent. That doesn't really matter. But that data doesn't belong to you. You got it from your parent component. And whenever props come to you, or whenever the props are received by the child component, they don't have any right to change those data. So props are immutable. It means you cannot change the props inside the child component in the lifetime of the entire component. This is because you don't own the props. Props belong to somebody else. So always remember that props are immutable. Okay, and props are the data which doesn't belong to you but received from the parent component. Whereas state is the data owned by that component. So it's like your name, your certificates, your degree, which you have earned by yourself, and it makes some sense to you, right? Also your name, right? So state is the data which is owned by that component, whereas props are the data received from the parent component. Okay, state can be changed, and you can perform any kind of operations using the state. Okay, and one thing which React does is whenever there is a state change, React re-renders the component. Whenever there is a state change, React re-renders the component. Okay, so if you define the excess amount of state in that component, then there are more number of data changes in that component, the data owned by that component, then that component will be re-rendered. Okay, so let's say you are storing all the application state. So this is because some people might think, hey, why can't I define state in my topmost component and I can simply pass that to my all the child components, right? Because like this, like I can define the state over here and I can pass that state to all the component as props, right? But the problem is when you define state over here, and whenever the state changes, it re-renders the component and also all the child elements. Let me repeat my statement. When the state changes, the React re-renders or updates the UI, not only the component where the data has changed or where the state has changed, but also all the children of that particular component. So a state change happens over here. It means React forces every other component to re-render because React cannot intelligently determine by itself that, okay, what if the state defined at this place might be passed as prop to all of those children. So what it does is whenever the state change happens, React pushes the state changes to all the components so that all the component re-render, and this might really have a bad effect on your performance, because the main purpose of the React.js was to reduce the amount of HTML which is being changed, right? With the amount of HTML which is changed and painted on the browser. So if there is a state change in this component, why do I have to render all of those? Now let me give an example. So let's say you're defining state, you're defining a state like name, age, and all. So name is used over here, but not in any place. Okay. Now, if I define the name state in the topmost component, and due to some reason name has changed, technically only this component should update, because only this component is dependent on the name, right? As you have defined the state in the topmost component, due to that bad design of defining the state in the topmost component, that forced you the React.js to render all of these components, which is very bad. What is the alternate solution? You can define state over here, that is the name, and when the name has changed, only this component will re-render and rest all are ignored. So this is why you need to define the state very well, and also you need to define the props very well. So what data you want to pass. So if there is a data change in any props or state, entire your application re-renders, and unnecessary re-renders will impact your performance. Then there is no use of using a framework like React or HTML. You can simply write it in HTML. Okay, so that's one of the major difference, guys. What is the props and what is the state? We'll look at this in practical, and we'll also understand how they are, how we can define and how we can play around with them.